We were both working in the kitchen, and we were working on the cupboards in the kitchen, and my buddy had knelt down because he was working on the lower doors, and then there was the counter and the upper doors above, and I was working on the cabinets up here. And while we were working, I opened that door. What I didn't notice is that I opened that door, and it was directly above the head of my buddy down there, working down there. And when I turned away, he stood up all of a sudden, and the point of that hardwood door dug into his scalp. Ouch! Now here's what's interesting, is that I said ouch louder than he did. And here's the other interesting thing. I saw the faces of some of you, and some of you said ouch inside your own. You said ouch to yourself. And so here's a man who got hurt, and you don't know who he is, and you never met him, and you've never seen him, and you said ouch inside of you. That's a spiritual event. The great philosopher and theologian, Canadian philosopher and theologian, Bernard Lonergan, was once coming out of the Jesuit residence, and there was a woman with a baby and a carriage, and he came out the door, and he saw her she was almost about to drop the baby, and he immediately went like this. Well, he was 20 feet away. He couldn't have gotten to that baby. He couldn't have caught that baby. There was nothing he could do. Spontaneously, he said ouch for that woman and that baby, just the way you did and I did. So what's going on? What's going on is that we all share the Spirit of God. And so when an ouch happens to any other human person, our spirit, which is the Spirit of Jesus Christ, which gives us a spirit of compassion, we say ouch too. That's what's going on. And it goes on all the time, and it's spontaneous. Our spirits say ouch for the suffering of any other human person if we will allow ourselves to feel for them. That's the truth of who we are, the way that God has made us. Because we all share the same Spirit, and because we have been given the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, as a gift of God. All people everywhere at all times have been given the gift of God's Spirit, and God's Spirit is a spirit of compassion. And so we say ouch with every other person. Our spirits will cry out ouch at the suffering of any other human person if we will let our spirit feel it. That's the truth of who we are. That's a remarkable thing. In our gospel, we need to put ourselves in the place of our disciples. The disciples are saying to themselves, they must be saying to themselves in one way or another, something that goes like this: I have given up everything to follow this guy, Jesus. Now, what seems to be is that if he's doing what only God can do, then he must be God. And if he is doing for me what only God can do, then Jesus must be God. That's got to be going on in the consciousness somewhere, in one way or another, inside the disciples who have given up everything and are following Jesus despite all the risks involved. They have to be saying, look what he's done for me. What he's done for me is he's become, I know somehow, without having any words to even explain it, that he is the answer to the deepest dreams and desires and hopes of my heart. And only God can do that. Then he must be God. And if he is doing in this world what only God can do, then he must be God. So somehow that's going on in the consciousness of the disciples. Something like that has to have been going on. And then who does, in this story and in the other stories of the gospel, if they're saying this man is doing what God does, then he must be God, then what is Jesus doing, and how does that reveal who God is in our story this morning? So we can see that, first of all, Jesus is just like us. He says, ouch, for the woman with the hemorrhage before she even sees her or knows who she is. Because healing power and compassion power and love power goes out of him to meet her need without him even being aware of who it is. He said, ouch, for her suffering, before he even knew who she was. And so what Jesus shows us very, very clearly is, and that if we think about it, I think we know that it's right. The beginning of love is to go outside of ourselves. The beginning of love is always to go outside ourselves. If we are going to stay closed and locked up in behind the wall of ourselves, where there's going to be no love. Love is the movement. Love is the beginning of love is always a movement outside ourselves. And that can happen. It has happened, it probably almost always begins with wonder. With the spirit of compassion wondering in us. Who is hurt? Who is that? Is someone hurt? What can I do about? What should I do? I can feel my spirit of compassion saying ouch with them before they've even moved. Before I even know it. Before I give it permission. My caring has already moved. And we go outside of ourselves when we even begin to wonder, can I help? What is their suffering? Can I do something about it? And so Jesus does that. Jesus love moves before he's even aware of it. So his love, something has already gone outside of himself and begun to love. And then he takes the second step. He gets right in the thick of it and he wants to know how to make it better. And that's what our love does. The beginning of love is to go beyond ourselves. But then here is Jesus, who is God. And what does God in the situation do? God wants to get in the thick of it and find out how to make things better, how to straighten things out. That's what Jesus wants to do. He wants to know who is it that touched him. And the disciples, Jesus, you can see they're pushing around you. What's the big deal? And no. I know the compassion of my heart and the healing power and the love power went out of me in response to somebody's need, and I want to get in the middle of it. I want to know what's going on, and I want to make things better. And that's what he does with the woman. Not only is she healed, that's not enough. He needs to look at her face to face, and he needs to bless her and say, your faith has made you whole. And embrace her back into the community. Because the other thing that's going on is that both of these women, this woman and this little girl, they're both untouchable. They're both unclean. Nobody can touch them, and they can't touch anybody else. The woman is unclean because she has this issue of blood. The blood in the Jewish tradition belongs to God, and when you cannot touch a woman who's menstruating without making you unclean. She has to be pushed to the side of society. She can't touch anybody, and nobody can touch her without becoming ritually unclean. And the little girl who is dead, you cannot touch a dead body without being made ritually unclean. And so what we have then is Jesus. What we have are boundaries and we have borders, and Jesus just reaches right across both of those boundaries and those borders, and he touches what cannot be touched, because they need his help and his compassion. And his compassion is moved outside of himself. And he wants to get in the middle of it and find out what's going on so he can make it better. And in order to do that, he has to reach across boundaries that his society has set and said, you can't reach across these. Now that's a remarkable thing about Jesus. Is that Jesus is a boundary crosser. There's no way to get around it. There's all kinds of boundaries in life, and some of them are perfectly good and legitimate. But the world is filled with boundaries that God has no respect for and that are not legitimate. There are boundaries that we make because of hatred between two people. We get our little border and our little boundary, and we say, well, you can't cross that right there. That's you can't get across that. And I'm not going across that. That's going to separate us. And there are the boundaries between two groups of people who have said, no, we're drawing a line here, and we're going to throw rocks at each other, and nobody can cross that line. And there are people who are full of hatred, and the people who believe people who are full of hatred, preachers and teachers and politicians who are full of hatred, and they create boundaries, and people believe them. There are families where the irritations of years of irritations have caused people to just draw a boundary and say, no, there's the border, we're not crossing that, that's the boundary. Our world is full of boundaries and borders of animosity and hatred, and Jesus does not respect them one bit and reaches right across them. And so our disciples are been following Jesus, and what's been going on inside of them from their point of view is, if this man does what only God can do, if he does for me what only God can do, he must be God. And then what is God like? Then what God is like is that God will go outside of himself. God is a person who goes outside of himself in the beginnings of love, and initially by sending his Son, and by also sending his Spirit. God goes outside of himself to give to us. God goes outside. God is the one who goes outside of himself to love. And he has this penchant, he has this desire to get his nose right in the middle of human affairs and to try to straighten them out. And in order to do that, he will cross boundaries and build bridges where the boundaries are boundaries because of hatred and prejudice and ignorance. He will cross them and he'll build a bridge. That's what God is like. That's what Jesus reveals in this gospel for God to be like. And so I would ask us to remember that Jesus has given us a spirit that will always cry out, ouch, at the pain and suffering of any other human person if we allow our spirits to feel, to care for that person. That's the end of the homily, but I have one more thing to say. I have a Jesuit tradition to carry out. It's a Jesuit tradition when leaving a place to ask for forgiveness. And so I want to do that. I know very well that I have offended any number of people, and I know, I am a person who has a great, nobody is more aware than I am of my limitations for what I've been asked to do, especially in this last year. I can be a bull in your china shop. You can get all of your glass figurines and your nice plates and all delicate and fragile and all in the right place, and I can come in and knock them over. So I'm well aware of that. And so I can honestly say that I have never offended anyone or hurt anyone and any purposely, and yet I know it has happened because I'm a human person and I'm a bull in the china shop sometimes. And so as my last words of the homily, I would like to ask everyone for your forgiveness and your mercy for my limitations and my failings. And I want to say thank you to everyone. You have made me a much better person and a much better priest than I was when I got here.